thinking about how to tell my memories of the years spent with Vanny and the tremendous influence of Skeff on our lives. And I think the best way to develop the story is to start from the beginning when I first met Vanny. I was having visual problems as an artist in art school in August 1937 when my homeopathic physician referred me to Dr. C. Bernard Lyons, my Vanny, for a visual analysis, telling me that he was sending me to the best eye doctor in the country. By the time this eye doctor completed his extensive visual analysis and wound up looking into my eyes with a lighted instrument and telling me that when I was about 4 or 5 years old, I was a very sick little girl, I thought he was not only the best, but he was a magician who could read your life in your eyes instead of using tea leaves. I later found out it was IRA diagnosis, which Vanny used very successfully. As my visual training, which he did himself at that time, progressed, I became so interested and excited with the fabulous and exciting work that I asked if he would consider employing me, which he did in January of the following year. At that time, Vanny was study group chairman in San Francisco for the Bay Area. So one of the conditions of my employment was that I would study whatever he felt I needed to study to become a visual training assistant, and that I would attend the twice monthly study group meetings. There were about 10 optometrists who attended regularly and 5 or 6 other assistants. We were required to work right along with the ODs on case studies and checking, chaining, and typing cases. I recorded for Vanny in the examining room so I would become familiar with the analytical and the sequence of findings. Vanny gave me reams of OEP material to study. Ralph Barstow speaking for assistance, Marge Tomey Ebro's chapters on visual training, and George Croce's collection of papers, as well as countless other writers. Vanny had volumes of technical material from the syntonic meetings he attended, which I studied with difficulty, but kept at it because it was so fascinating. It was a good thing my visual training had helped my reading because I spent most of my time at it. Vanny spurred me on by telling me that the day he looked forward to was when I could answer questions myself that came up in the study group. From the first, the name of Skeffington became as well known to me almost as much as my own name. I could easily recognize that he was Vanny's mentor and a hero of vast dimensions. As the months passed during the first year, I grew increasingly more curious to meet this person and find if he was larger than life as Vanny had painted him. When December came, so did Skeff for a San Francisco seminar held at the Cliff Hotel, Skeff's favorite hotel in the country. The meeting had started when we arrived, and Skeff was on the platform speaking in his own inimitable language and voice, dressed in a startlingly white suit, black and white cravat, and spats. As he stalked the platform, he looked awesome, and I stood transfixed. He looked like a hero out of one of my mother's old-time novels of the mythical kingdom of Graustark. During the 2 days of the seminar, I was in a daze. But I was finding that his mind and thinking were even more magnificent than Vanny had described. I took notes, I recorded the case findings he gave us, and I checked and chained and typed the cases. I can still recall how delighted and proud Vanny was when Skeff told him what a lucky man he was to have found such an intelligent assistant. And my response was that that was because I had such an intelligent and dedicated teacher. He and I were married in 1939, and from that time on, each year, when Skeff came in December, we closed the office and spent 2 weeks with Skeff, driving him to all the meetings around the Bay Area, starting with San Francisco, then San Jose, then on to Sacramento, which was only for 2 or 3 years. And then we would go to Stockton and back to San Francisco for 2 or 3 days of wonderful leisure before taking the Cascade train up to Portland for the Northwest Congress. In San Francisco, we always stayed at the Cliff, where we had such wonderful times together, living and breathing optometry. I would sit for hours spellbound, while those two great minds that so complemented one another shared their thinking. And then Vanny and I would listen entranced while Skeff told us about his early life before and after going into optometry, the beginnings of the OEP, and his meeting in early days with Alexander. A few times the Crows, George and Arla, would meet us in San Francisco, and then we would all go on to Portland together. When Georgie was with us, there was always the challenge of minds that occurred when Skeff and Georgie got together. Skeff would bait Georgie on some of his favorite subjects that he knew he could get a rise out of. Georgie would finally grow livid and start waving those long arms and fingers in the air. And he would tell Skeff he was his so-and-so bastard and didn't know what the hell he was talking about, I quote Georgie, and then start putting together a long line of thinking that Skeff had been waiting for. Skeff, as usual, sitting back with an enigmatic smile, just drinking it in. Much thinking came out of those all-night sessions, as Jerry Getman is coming. I recall the year Ward Halstead was on the Northwest Congress. On the last night he was there, many of us congregated in Skeff's room, where the scintillating conversation went on far into the night until everyone had sleepily departed and it left Skeff, Ward, Vanny, and me. This was before Skeff had developed his interlocking circles and the emergent. He was telling Ward how he visualized intelligence and how he felt Ward had not included vision properly in his book, Brain and Intelligent. In my mind's eye, I can still see them. Skeff and Ward seated opposite one another with a long coffee table between them. Skeff picked up a piece of paper from the coffee table and roughly sketched his model. I still have that piece of paper someplace. Ward sat looking at it. Then he slowly leaned forward. He looked at Skeff, and he softly said, "Skeff, you old son of a bitch. It's so elegant." I think this was about 5 a.m. when we all decided that we were ready for some breakfast, so we put on our coats over our formal Congress ball clothes and walked down to a working man's restaurant where many of them were in overalls and blue jeans breakfasting to start their work. There was a complete and amazed silence when we walked in. Ward, Vanny, and Skeffy in their tuxes, Skeff with his top coat flung over his shoulders like an opera cape as he usually wore it, and his usual very elegant gray Homburg. I was in a long white chiffon dress with gold bugle beads on the top. Skeff bowed to one and all and said, "Don't let us interrupt your feeding the inner man," and this brought down the house. Another Congress that I recall was when Jerry Getman, Darrell Boyd Harmon, and Skeff shared the platform in Portland, which was the last Congress in a series they had been doing together. By the time they reached Portland, and after many all-night bull sessions together, they were so far above any of the rest of us that Georgie commented in his less than gentle way, "You guys need to get back to Earth. You are so far up on Cloud 9 that the rest of us can only see the soles of your feet hanging over the edge." I recall Jerry and Darrell became very irritated with Skeff because when he opened the Congress in his hour, he would have integrated all of their thinking into his own from the night before a bull session and jumped the gun and was off running with the total ideas. Skeffy had a way of taking all of our thinking that we had so laboriously put together piece by piece, and he would synthesize it into a new whole. And there he was, a few leagues ahead of where we were. It was exasperating, but it certainly challenged us to keep working and maybe sometime catch up with him, which never happened that I can recall. Shortly after I started working with Vanny, a principal from a large public school in San Francisco came into the office as a patient. She had a group of retarded readers which she was anxious for us to examine and work with. At that time, Vanny was friendly with Dr. T.A. Brombach, who had done extensive study with enlarged blind spots in children with reading problems. We became curious to know if the blind spots would reduce as a result of visual training. So we decided to take on her children as a research project. We examined them pre- and post-training with amazing decrease in the spots. I've been hunting all this material among the masses of stored boxes in our garage, but I haven't located it yet. So I'll have to just give only what I recall, which is pretty hazy. When Skeff came to San Francisco, Vanny showed him all the material, all of the material with the result that Vanny wound up as one of the main speakers at the AOA National Meeting in Dallas. I can't remember what year it was. We were simply agog, as you can imagine. To this day, it remains a highlight in my memory. We met so many of the greats in optometry that we'd read about and heard about it, and at that meeting, there they were, bigger than life. Marge Eberl, Ward Ewald, E.B. Alexander, Gene Epling and his wife, the one Skeff called Buffel, and a lot of others that I can't remember their names, plus Skeff's nieces who attended the meeting. It was a 5-star event. That was really the beginning of Vanny's lecture tours. In the 40s, it was the custom for the congresses to be held on successive weekends, and they invited the same speaker to 5 congresses in a row to appear at each one. So around 1942, through Skeff, Vanny was invited to do the Congress swing, as they called it. The first was the Middle Atlantic in Pittsburgh, where Vanny and Skeff shared the platform with Emmett Betts. We would meet Skeff at each Congress on the weekends, where he had some famous scientist in tow. Congress speaker, along with Vanny and himself. They were days packed with learning and thinking, and bull sessions far into the night with the particular scientist or educator that Skeff had found. Some of these were John Paul Nath, Emmett Betts, Sam Renshaw, Ward Halstead, Darrell Boyd Harmon, Selig Heck, and on and on and on. In between the weekends, Vanny would do one-night stands in various cities and towns along the way to the next Congress. The one stop I recall especially was in Zanesville, Ohio, where the hotel we stayed in was so old they had pull-chain toilets, ceilings miles high it seemed, and hallway floors that creaked and rose and fell, and it felt like we were mountain climbing as we walked on them. It was a great adventure all the way, and we loved every minute, even though Vanny worked until he was exhausted, and he wound up with a stomach hemorrhage after we got home. But that didn't keep him from doing the fall Congress swing in the following fall, from which I detoured to do 6 weeks at the Baltimore Project with Arla Crow, Violet Doris, Anita Ebro, and myself working with the children. It was an amazing experience. That's another story. Around 1950, Vanny and I started developing the See Don't Say philosophy and the visual science material that later composed the units of the visualization series. Using the material with the standard visual training procedures that were developed by George Crow and others through the OEP, we observed such dramatic changes in people, an expansion of thinking in learning disabled children. It was staggering. Since we had needed substantiation of the increases in thinking, we decided to start testing kids pre- and post-training on the then-new Thurston Primary Mental Abilities test. These tests verified the changes we were seeing in thinking. This office research was the basis for Vanny's 2 Portland Congress lectures in 1951 and 1952. In August of '53, we presented all of the case studies at the OEP San Jose conference that Skeff always attended. After that meeting, as we had done for many years, we went to Alex and Abby Alexander's home in Tarzana to help celebrate Skeff's birthday. Skeff encouraged us to show the material to Alex because in our lecture material we had used the diagrammatic interpretation of vision that Alex had recently organized and had published. I'll never forget Alex as he studied the charts. He stared at them so long that we thought he'd gone to sleep. And then suddenly he turned to us and he said, "Well, Skeff, if this is so, then it really proves what you and Halstead have been saying all the time, that vision and intelligence really are the same process." Skeff sat there just nodding and looking at Alex with that enigmatic smile. Alex then wasted no time getting the material published. With the invaluable help of Martha Stem, we prepared the material for publication in the Journal of the American Optometric Association, where it was published in December 1954, the first in the series of 5 articles on the power of optometric visual training. Skeff quoted from these many times in his seminar and Congress lectures. As I said, they were unforgettable times. I'd like to end this tape by reading a letter I sent around to a few of you in March 1976, after Skeff's death. It really states what Skeff meant to me. It began, "Dear ones, just a note sharing and joining hands with the ones of us who had our lives so profoundly influenced and changed by that master of wisdom and intellect, Dr. A.M.Skeffington, our Skeffy. He was one of those inspired and inspiring teachers who are able to elicit extraordinary performance from their students and so influence all lives they touch as a teacher. But some of us had the incredibly great fortune of knowing him not only as a great teacher, but as a loved friend. As a friend, he really listened to what we said and cared about what we thought. He always made me feel that he learned from me, just as I learned from him. The wonderful hours Vanny and I spent with Skeffy were times for spinning great dreams of work that was still to be done by all of us, and somehow he helped us to see the great dream that guided him. He had a genius for including us in those great dreams of his. We became participants with him in achieving a new view, a new vision for all. But more than anything else, he helped me, and I know you all share this feeling because that was his particular gift, to think well of myself. I could easily have sat at his feet an adoring spectator, but he made me feel that I was of worth, his equal, and needed to do my thing as he was needed for his, for the good of all concerned. To us, he was the great one, the one with the Olympian view of life. His contribution to human understanding will ever live on and ever grow greater. That we were near him and shared with him is a feeling to be cherished always. I shall ever remember him, ever miss him, and ever feel the sense of miracle, good fortune, and gratitude that our lives touched. So let's drink a toast to our reunion. Don't care where we reune, just so we reune often. Let's rejoice with him in his great adventure. Grieve not for me who am about to start a new adventure. Rather fill a cup and drink to one who ever loved new ways. Ahead, unfurrowed, lie broad fields for me. Lands unexplored stretch out. A far-flung sea is beckoning, and even now a ship to bear me builds in the eternal slip. Eager I stand and ready to depart, I and my restless, pioneering heart. I send fellowship, a dedication to his dream, and love to each one of you, and it's signed, Emmy. So now, today, it's April the 13th, 1986. Just 2 years later, I send fellowship, dedication to his dream, and love to each one of you. L'envoi.
Dr. Friedson, seems strange, but I have the semblance of a voice this morning. Maybe 2 or 3 days I'll have it back again. I want to discuss this morning with you visual training and some of the reasons that it's difficult to make visual training stick. Rather, I should say not to make it stick, but some of the reasons it's difficult to persuade people to take training. In the first place, there is a little problem connected with visual training, and that is that we don't have enough men doing it. They don't know how to do it, and they don't recognize a training case. For recognizing this problem and some of the others connected with postgraduate study, in June, I wrote a letter to the some 400-odd study group chairman of the United States, and I told them this: an entire new generation of optometrists are now in practice. Therefore, we have a twofold problem. One, how do we best interest these new men from different schools and with their varying degrees of understanding of near-point optometry? How do we get them to dig in and learn the basics and assume leadership? Is exactly the situation you have today in optometry. You have a large group of 25 to 35-year-old You have a few in the 35 to 45 age group, and then there is a comparatively large group of the 45 plus. But we don't need to be too concerned about the 45 plus because time and attrition will take care of most of them in about 8 or 10 years. Don't look at me like that, Charlie. You will. So we can't get out of it. So where optometry goes for the next 25 years is where this 25 to 35 age group takes it. Therefore, we've got a serious problem on our hands. We've got to get them to dig in and assume the leadership. Well, it's important. And I said in that letter, they have varying degrees of understanding of near-point optometry. Isn't that right? Every school teaches it. Now, there's two ways of teaching it. One way is to say, here is a system of analysis and care for patients which works. This is the way you prescribe lenses, this is the way you prescribe training, and this is the way you take care of patients' visual problems. That's one way of teaching it. Then there's another way. There's another way that says, here's a routine from 1 to 21. You better learn it, brother, or certain boards will flunk you. But it isn't very important, and after you get it learned and you get it by the boards, you can forget it because you don't need it in practice. Now, don't ask me which schools are which. Just ask the graduates. They'll tell you. They'll tell you. Well, we know that the second type of school is incorrect. And the graduates of that type of school, we've got to get to see the light. So there's our job, is to get that 25 to 35 age group going the way we want them to. Now, in that letter, I said, will you take a few minutes off and tell me what your reaction is and what you suggest and what do you think about the situation? Well, now, that's a typical form letter, and the recipients of that recognized it as such. And ordinarily on a form letter, you get a 1 or a 1.5% response. But on that one, my desk was overwhelmed in about 10 days. They just deluged me with letters from all ends of the country and Canada. And because I said, you can make it long or short, some of them are 5 pages long. So on September 1, I put out a resume to the chairman, the study group chairman, of what their letters had to say. Now, they divided the course into 2 groups, the groups that are failing and the groups that are succeeding. Now, the failing groups told us this. The groups which are failing over a period of time fail for the following reasons. 1, the study group is conceived to be a lodge or a social group. 2, the group feels that unless it has a big crowd at every meeting, it is not a success. 3, outside speakers are brought in to entertain and to discuss anything and everything but analytical optometry. This record, Dorothy, is private. I'm beginning to think it has signs of being a patient who comes in to see you, as Dr. Hofstadter has sagely remarked, has already diagnosed his own case as a visual problem, else why would he be in? Honest oculists tell me that patients don't have any trouble diagnosing their case as not being a visual problem, but a medical problem when they have a glaucoma. Because when they have an eye that jumps like a jumping toothache, they know darn well they don't want a pair of glasses a half diopter stronger. They beat it direct to the oculist. Well, if you have one of those slow, insidious, creeping types of glaucoma, you know, that just sort of sneak up on you and all of a sudden the patient's blind, you know, you hear about those. If you think your patient has one of those, go ahead and complete your services and then refer. But don't make your study group a stalking horse to fix you up so all you do is refer your practice out the window. I said enough about glaucoma. Back on the record now, Dorothy. 4, meetings are held haphazardly or at irregular intervals. 5, there is not enough drive or will to work by either chairman or members. That's what the failures said. Now, successful groups said this. Successful groups adhere to the following principles. 1, their primary purpose is to raise standards of practice and increase proficiency by hard work and earnest study of analytical optometry and visual skills training. 2, better relationships between members are promoted. They know that optometry rises only when most of the optometrists advance by working together as friendly colleagues, not by dragging their feet as suspicious competitors. 3, their chief papers of study are the Yellow Analytical Series and the Barstow papers. 4, a well-thought-out program is arranged and followed meticulously. 5, optometric politics is taboo. 6, the group sticks to OEP subjects without outside distractions. And 7, and most important, the group leader keeps everlastingly at it. Well, you say, look, if I become a study group leader, I have to work harder than anybody in the group. That's right. I have to put out a lot of additional time to learn the questions and answers. That's right. I even have to spend some of my own money for phone calls, postcards, and so forth. That's right. And it takes a lot of time and effort. That's right. But what do you get out of it? You get a little reward. If you want to know a subject, teach it. Teach it. Why does Skeff know more about analytical optometry than any of the rest of us? Because he has to know all the answers. He's teaching it. He can't stand up here and teach it to you and have you throw him a question and he doesn't know the answer. He has to know the answer. So I feel a bit sorry for a study group leader because he has to work harder, has to spend some money and a few other things. Sure he does. But it makes him the outstanding optometrist in his area. And it does something else for him, too. It helps him to bring up the level of standard of practice in his area. And when he brings that level up and he stands out above the crowd, then he's just that much better. Well, those 2 letters were written to the chairman when I was comparatively calm, and then I got sore and wrote a letter. Now, the rule is when you get mad and write a letter, go ahead and write it, but don't mail it. So this one wasn't mailed. And this one said to study group leaders, you've already had 2 letters from me. It would be easy to follow with a series of carefully edited platitudes and nice, namby-pamby flapdoodle. Leave us face it with no evasions. Optometry is considered a second-rate profession by the general public. Did you ever get a phone call like this? Dr. Blank, are you a real eye specialist or just an optometrist? Did you ever get one? I have. Well, what's your instinct? Your instinct is to tell them off, isn't it? What right has anybody to call you on the phone or in person and hand you a gratuitous insult like that? But don't follow your instinct. It won't work. There is a method of answering a question like that, and I'd like to give you the method because so many people don't know the method. The method is the Socratic method. Barstow has suggested it to you many times. He borrowed it from Socrates, which isn't a bad place to borrow things when you need help. You answer the question with a question. So when somebody calls up and says, are you a real eye specialist or just an optometrist, you answer, what do you want? Surgery, or do you have a visual problem? What do you want? And then they'll tell you. In the first place, who wants a knife stuck in his eye? Do you? I don't. I for sure don't. And I don't think you do either. 99 times out of 100, the patient answers, the prospective patient answers, oh, no, I don't want surgery. I have trouble reading, or I've got headaches, or I can't see this and that and the other. Well, let them sound off for a while, and then say, well, from what you told me, you've got a visual problem, all right, and that's my job. I'm a specialist in vision. Aren't you? Doesn't medicine and surgery end about 25 millimeters behind the cornea? And doesn't vision go all the way back? You can trace it back to areas 17, 18, and 19, and then it gets lost in the ramifications of the whole tie-in which it has in the whole body, and you can't isolate it or separate it into its parts. any more than you can separate fusion into its parts and find out what fusion is. So vision takes part in the whole body, and that's your job, is vision. Well, what makes me say optometry is considered second rate? Well, I think I can give you the answer on that one. The answer is that when you check with a patient like this, you will find that he has probably been to a medical man and has gotten a drops, refraction, and a pair of glasses he can't wear. So then he's gone to a quickie fit optometrist and gotten another pair that he can't wear. Well, that's swell. About that time, I'd be looking for a real eye specialist, wouldn't you? But why do I say optometry is second rate? Well, I'll tell you why. When the oculist strikes out, by gosh, he at least gets the bat off his shoulder, doesn't he? He goes down swinging, and that looks better than just standing there and taking 3 strikes. You see, also, the oculist may have missed his refraction, but he may be very good on submucous resections, or he may be a pip on a tonsillectomy. And the patient says, well, I'll forgive Doc for missing on that because he was so good on the other things. But the optometrist has one thing, his ability to refract and his ability to prescribe and skillfully administer visual training. And that's all he does have. So unless he produces on that one thing, optometry is certainly second rate. And in addition, medical, professional salesmanship is better than optometric professional salesmanship. So I say that when both professions miss a case, it winds up with optometry being second rate. Well, that's fine. What are you going to do about it? Well, here's what I suggest that we do about it. You can't afford to belong to a second-rate profession, can you? And the kind of work that you're doing is not second-rate. But what you've got to do is to get these other fellas who are doing far-point subjective into the fold. Well, how do you do it? Well, I'm going to suggest a technique for you to consider and take home and study. And I call it the Joe technique because that isn't what it is. Joe wasn't the fellow's name, but I've used it on a lot of Joes, and it works. You go into a good conscientious optometrist who's a far-point fitter and say, Joe, did you ever have a case that was a clear-cut plus 1 1/4 for distance, and you prescribed it? And the patient came back and said he couldn't wear them. Well, now if Joe's honest, you say, yes, that's happened to me. So what do you do, Joe? Do you make them stronger? Do you make them weaker? Well, Joe says, well, you see, sometimes I made them a little stronger, and, sometimes I made them weaker. I said, well, Joe, why? Well, I did that according to the way I felt about the feel of the case, you know. I said, Joe, would you like to know a method where you'd know whether you should make them stronger or weaker? And not only that, but you know in advance, so you don't have that disaster of the complaining patient and the regrind and the dissatisfaction and the wasted time. Well, Joe says, sure would. You got one? I said, yes, Joe, we have. Get in the study group and we'll show you how it works. Well, Joe says, that's interesting. How do you find it out? I said, well, I'll show you, Joe. There's a subjective of plus 1 1/4. The patient has never worn glasses. And that is an analytical subjective, meaning that it's the most plus that will allow him to see 20/20, period. He doesn't see 20/15 with that, except he might pick up a letter or two on the 20/15 line, and that's all. That just gives him 20/20. In other words, a crowded plus correction. Well, that's all you know about it if you do a subjective, isn't it? But here's the other things, Joe, that you find out about the case when you do it a la OEP. near point analysis too, you find out also at near point that if this case is an A-type case, your prescription might be plus 50 combined with a refer for medical or dental attention. If the case is a B1 simple, the prescription could be plus 1 1/4. If the prescription is a B17, the prescription could be plus 1/4 or plus 50, on and off, and visual training. Not and or, but and. Now, if the case is a B2 simple, the prescription could be plus 50 combined with a plus 1 1/4 add OU, preferably and bifocals, and preferably to be worn all the time. Or if the case is a B27, the prescription could be plus 1/4 or plus 50 on and off at near point and visual training. Not and or, but and. And if the case is a C-type case, the prescription could be plus 50 and visual training. Well, Joe said, how'd you find this out? So we found it out by what we found at near point, which tells us what you can get away with at far point. And your plus 1 1/4, you can see, will take care of only the B1 simple. Well, that's fine. The plus 1 1/4 picks up the B1 simple, don't they? The trouble is, you and I know that you don't see 1 or 2 B1 simples a year, do you? They wait till they get into a lot more trouble before they come in. So those are the things you find out at near point, which tells you what you can do in the limitation of lens prescription. And also tell you that you can't say, well, I would like to do visual training, but I'm too busy. Because that is the way human beings come in. Those are classifications of normal human beings walking the streets of your town and mine. Well, let's see. Let's do it the Smarty Pants commercial way, Joe says. I've heard that the Smarty Pants commercialists cut plus, cut cylinders, cut minus, cut everything. Let's give that a good swift cut and see what happens. Well, instead of giving plus 1 1/4, we'll be safe and give plus 50. Well, does that take care of an A-type case without the refer? I hope to tell you it does not. It does not. Supposing your case has a mouthful of abscessed teeth, or suppose he has a latent syphilis of which he is not aware, and such conditions do exist. You may have a patient in 2 or 3 months who doesn't require any lens power because he's dead. He doesn't require anything then. So plus 50 without the refer doesn't solve the problem. Well, does plus 50 take care of a B1 simple who's wide open for a plus 1 1/4? No. Does not. Is plus 50 too strong for a B17 when the most you can get on is plus 1/4 or plus 1/2 and then rock it on with training? Sure, it's too strong. Well, how about a B2 simple? Is plus 50 all right for distance? Sure, but where's the problem? It's at near point. Is plus 50 the answer for a patient whose near point prescription is plus 175 and they're wide open? Of course it isn't. Well, Joe says, wait a minute. You just said this was a person. Supposing this person is 9 years old. Supposing that person is 9 years old, you mean to tell me you put bifocals on that? Sure do. We sure do. And they work. Well, he says, gosh, that's interesting, isn't it? Now, supposing the patient is a B27. Is plus 50 too strong? Sure is. The most you can start with is plus 1/4 or plus 50 and rock plus on with training. Is plus 50 all right for a C-type case? No, not without the training. Well, how about the training without the plus 50? That won't work either. We tried that 15 years ago. We built ductions until they were regular Hercules as far as ductions went. And then what happened? They went out and fell right on their face again, didn't they? Well, Joe says, where do you learn all this? I said, well, Joe, it's in the study group, but you have to get in and learn it. Well, he says, it isn't simple, is it? No, it isn't simple. Did you ever hear of anything that was worthwhile, that was simple or easy? It takes some brain sweat. But whatever. If I could do it, you can do it. Now come on and get in the study group. Well, that's fine. But Joe says, I have a few more questions to ask you. You know, I've heard you talk about this visual training. So, you know, I've heard it can't be done. I've heard it can't be done. I've read articles about it that you can't train vision. It's just, that's what they call muscle bending, and it doesn't work. Well, wait a minute, Joe. Let's consider what you and I know as adult human beings without anything that we know as optometrists. As adult human beings, let's take a look at a few of the things we do know. Can touch be trained? Did you ever see a touch typist or an expert pianist? Of course it can be trained. How about sense of smell? Did you read in the Saturday Evening Post about 5 weeks ago or so of a man who's built his sense of smell up to the place where he can classify literally thousands upon thousands of smells? You and I can't do it. At present, we can't do it, but he's learned how to do it. Can taste be trained? Did you ever hear of a tea taster? Or a Swiss milk chocolate taster who can bite into a piece of milk chocolate and tell you whether it's Wisconsin Swiss or Switzerland Swiss, and if it's Switzerland Swiss, tell you darn near from which canton in Switzerland it came from, and almost from which cow. Can you and I do it? No. But he learned to train his sense of taste. How about hearing? How about hearing? Toscanini has a 110-piece orchestra going all at once. Way over in the
How
corner.
to tell my memories
One guy hits a
of
sour
the
note.
years spent with Vanny and the tremendous influence of Skeff on our lives.
Sure does. Would you and I hear it?
And
We'd never
the
know
best
the
way
difference.
to develop
That's why
this
he's
story
Toscanini.
is to start from the beginning when
How
I
about
first met
telephone?
Vanny.
All my life, since I've been
I
able
was
to
having
answer a
visual
telephone,
problems
I've
as an
held the
artist in
receiver
art
here
school
because
in
I'm
August
right-handed.
1937 when my
If you're
homeopathic
right-handed,
physician referred
next time
me
you get a phone call, stick it
to
over here
Dr.
and see
C.
what
Bernard
happens.
Lyons, my Vanny,
Here's what happens to
for
me.
a visual
The
analysis,
person on the other end of the
telling
phone
me that he was
backs
sending
away
me to
about
the
4
best
feet.
eye doctor in the country.
Commences to mumble. And I might say develops
By the
a voice
time this
kind of
eye
like I have
doctor
this morning.
completed his extensive visual analysis
Well, there.
and wound
Joe
up
says
looking
that's
into
the
my
same.
eyes with a lighted
Your
instrument
left ear
and
is better.
telling me
You're right.
that when I was about 4 or 5 years old, I was a very
At 10
sick
feet, I
little
can hear a
girl.
clock tick with my right
I
ear, and
thought
I have to
he
get up to
was
3
not
feet
only
with
the
my left ear.
best, but he
So it
was
isn't
a
that.
magician
But this one
who could
is
read
trained,
your life
trained
in your
through years
eyes
of
instead
experience to listen to a
using tea
telephone
leaves.
and to interpret it.
I
Try it
later
yourself.
found out it was IRA
Well, what do
diagnosis,
we know
which
about
Fanny
vision
used
without
very
knowing anything
successfully.
about it as optometrists, just as human beings?
As my visual training, which
Just
he
before
did
I left
himself
Hollywood
at that
on this
time
trip,
progressed,
I had good
I
luck.
became so interested
broke
and
the cusp
excited with
of
the
the second
fabulous
moment.
and exciting
Well,
work
that was good luck because
that
as
I
long as
asked
I'm going
if he
to do
would
it, I better
consider
do it there than
employing
on the
me,
road.
which he did
So I
in
went in.
January of the following
And the
year.
dentist yanked the inlay out.
At that
Now, the
time,
dentist
Vanny was study
and
group
his
chairman in
assistant were
San
both patients
Francisco
of
for the Bay Area.
And they both have good
So one of the
acuity.
conditions of my employment was
So,
that I would
they
study
took a
whatever
look
he
down
felt
into
I
the Grand
needed to
Canyon.
study to become a
The
visual training assistant,
could see the
and that
problem
I would attend the twice
The
monthly
dentist
study
could see
group
the
meetings.
problem and the solution.
There were about 10
That's why
optometrists
he's the
who
dentist.
attended regularly
I
and
could
5
not
or 6
acuity
other
key.
assistants.
If I could
We
look
were
into that
required to
tooth,
work
what would
right
I
along
see?
with the ODs on case
See a
studies
tooth with a hole
and
in it,
checking,
wouldn't I?
chaining, and typing cases.
That's all.
I recorded for Vanny in the examining room so I would become familiar with the analytical and the sequence of findings. Vanny gave me reams of OEP material to study. Ralph Barstow speaking for assistance, Marge Tomey Ebro's chapters on visual training, and George Crow's collection of papers, as well as countless other writers. Vanny had volumes of technical material from the syntonic meetings he attended, which I studied with difficulty, but kept at it because it was so fascinating. It was a good thing my visual training had helped my reading because I spent most of my time at it. Vanny spurred me on by telling me that the day he looked forward to was when I could answer questions myself that came up in the study group.
So the watchmaker takes a look,
From the first,
and he sees
the name of Skeffington became as well known to me almost as much as my own name. I could easily recognize that he was Vanny's mentor and a hero of vast dimensions. As the months passed during the first year, I grew increasingly more curious to meet this person and find if he was larger than life as Vanny had painted him. When December came, so did Skeff, for the San Francisco seminar held at the Cliff Hotel, Skeff's favorite hotel in the country.
That's what they tell me.
The meeting had started when we arrived, and Skeff was on the platform speaking in his own inimitable language and voice, dressed in a startlingly white suit, black and white cravat, and spats. As he stalked the platform, he looked awesome, and I stood transfixed. He looked like a hero out of one of my mother's old-time novels of the mythical kingdom of Grostark.
No shot will cure you.
During the 2 days of the seminar, I was in a daze. But I was finding that his mind and thinking were even more magnificent than Vanny had described. I took notes, I recorded the case findings he gave us, and I checked and chained and typed the cases. I can still recall how delighted and proud Vanny was when Skeff told him what a lucky man he was to have found such an intelligent assistant. And my response was that that was because I had such an intelligent and dedicated teacher. He and I were married in 1939. And from that time on, each year, when Skeff came in December, we closed the office and spent 2 weeks with Skeff, driving him to all the meetings around the Bay Area, starting with San Francisco, then San Jose, then on to Sacramento, which was only for 2 or 3 years. And then we would go to Stockton and back to San Francisco for 2 or 3 days of wonderful leisure before taking the Cascade train up to Portland for the Northwest Congress. In San Francisco, we always stayed at the Cliff, where we had such wonderful times together, living and breathing optometry. I would sit for hours spellbound, while those two great minds that so complemented one another shared their thinking. And then Vanny and I would listen entranced while Skeff told us about his early life, before and after going into optometry, the beginnings of the OEP, and his meeting in early days with Alexander. A few times the Crows, George and Arla, would meet us in San Francisco, and then we would all go on to Portland together. When Georgie was with us, there was always the challenge of minds that occurred when Skeff and Georgie got together. Skeff would bait Georgie on some of his favorite subjects that he knew he could get a rise out of. Georgie would finally grow livid and start waving those long arms and fingers in the air. And he would tell Skeff he was his so-and-so bastard and didn't know what the hell he was talking about. I quote Georgie, and then start putting together a long line of thinking that Skeff had been waiting for. Skeff, as usual, sitting back with an enigmatic smile, just drinking it in. Much thinking came out of those all-night sessions, as Jerry Getman has commented.
What are they doing in 5
I
years?
recall the year Ward Halstead
You mean
was
to say
on the
in 5
Northwest
years you can't
Congress.
crack
The
the
last
visual
night,
problem?
on the last
just
night he was
suggest
there, many of us congregated in Skeff's room, where the
Efforts solve the visual training
scintillating
problems of the
conversation went on
I
far
would
into
suggest
the
for
night,
your study groups also for
until
a project
everyone had sleepily
that you don't
departed
do
and it
another
left
darn
Skeff,
thing
Ward,
for the
Vanny,
next
and me.
year. That you
This
in your
was
study
before
groups
Skeff had developed
crack
his
the visual
interlocking
problem of
circles
every
and
man
the
in the
emergent.
group. Every man in the group.
He was telling Ward
Work
how
at
he
it till you get it
visualized
solved.
intelligence and how he
And
felt
you'll
Ward
know a lot
had
more
not
about
included
training.
vision
And
properly
you'll
in
find
his book,
training
Brain and
easier to
Intelligence.
sell. Quote,
In my
unquote.
mind's eye, I can still
No.
see them.
Why am I
Skeff
yelling
and
about
Ward
more people in the
seated
study
opposite
groups?
one
Maybe I
another
can give you
with a
another
long
answer.
coffee table
I
between
want
them.
more visual.
Skeff picked up a piece of paper from